Okay, good afternoon. My name is Evan Weiner, and we're going to talk about 2025. No, we're going to talk about 1890. And one of the more interesting presidents that you don't know about is Benjamin Harrison. How many of you have ever heard of Benjamin Harrison? Well, you've heard of him, but you don't know much about him. And he's quite an interesting character. In fact, Teddy Roosevelt, a lot of the things Harrison introduced, Teddy Roosevelt actually ended up doing. But the McKinley Tariff, which destroyed the economy by 1893, is first and foremost there. Then you got Jacob Riis. How many of you have heard of Jacob Riis? Riis Park. Well, he wrote a book called How the Other Half Lives, and it talked about the extreme poverty of New York City and the immigrant experience in New York City. How many of you have background in Lower Manhattan, or your relatives came from Lower Manhattan? Some of you, any of you? You have. Well, he wrote about it in 1890. What to do with immigration? What to do with immigration? We don't know. We don't know, but we know we have to do something about immigration, but we have no idea what we should be doing with immigration. The Sherman Antitrust Act was supposed to get rid of the Gilded Age people, the Morgans and the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers of the time. So here are the monopolists, and here are the people trying to run away from the monopolists and make life, or at least level the playing field for people. Meat inspection. There was no meat inspection in the United States until 1890. 1890 is when the USDA finally decided to take a look at meat, and they didn't do it for Americans. They did it because they were exporting meat, and people in Europe say, hey, wait a minute, this might not be any good. Statehood is granted to Idaho. Statehood is granted to Wyoming. John Muir and Yosemite National Park. Yosemite National Park, anybody been there? You have. Beautiful? Well, yeah, 1890 it becomes a national park. The Wounded Knee Massacre basically ended Native Americans' rights in the United States, and this happens in South Dakota late in the year. The West is won. The West is won. There is no more frontier. The frontier has been conquered. There was a new baseball league. It was called the Players League, and basically the league was set up so players could go from team to team. And Jim Crow laws were enacted in the South, and women want the right to vote. They want the right to vote. And there's a scramble for land in Africa between European colonial powers. Vincent van Gogh died. How many of you have seen Starry, Starry Night at the MoMA? If you've gone down to the MoMA? Sure. Yeah, you've seen Starry, Starry Night. He's got his ear in this painting. Yeah. He's got his ear. And the first electric chair, execution was up in Auburn, New York, back in 1890. So who is this guy, William McKinley? And why is William McKinley still, 135 years later, relevant? What did he do that people today are saying, hey, you know what? He did a good job. So who is it? Well, on October 1st, the McKinley Tariff of 1890 became law, and it was a protective tariff of about 50% on about 1,500 products, which meant that it wasn't the foreign countries paying the tariff, wasn't the companies paying the tariff, it was consumers paying the tariff. That's how tariffs work. McKinley was the Ways and Means Committee chairman and led the effort in the United States House of Representatives to get various tariffs passed. And in those days, it made some sense, and I'll explain to you why in a few minutes, particularly on the Hudson River. The Republican platform is, raise the price on common cloth and don't worry about whiskey. Whiskey is untaxed, but the t-shirt you're wearing is taxed. He was known as the Napoleon of protection. The core idea was that higher tariffs would create a more favorable environment for American manufacturers leading to increased job and production and job creation within the United States. And all you had to do was go up the Hudson River to understand what he was talking about. Sail up the Hudson River, particularly on the west side of the Hudson River, in the Rockland County part, there are a lot of industries. Also on the other side, Yonkers and Tarrytown, there are a lot of industries. Go up to Albany, go down the Erie Canal, and you had places like Gloversville where they made gloves, and Endicott where they made shoes, and all up and down the Erie Canal, and you get to Buffalo, and all that stuff goes to the Great Lakes and ends up in Detroit, and Chicago, and Wisconsin, and other areas. So it made sense because get more production out of American workers, and also the tariffs were funding the government. Most of the tariffs went to the federal government to fund it. So it made sense in 1890. The McKinley Tariff was a key piece of the Republican platform and represented a commitment to protecting American industries. Powerful figures in industries such as steel and oil and manufacturing benefited greatly from these protectionist policies, and they did wield a considerable amount of influence on politicians. Proponents argued that the tax would protect American workers from lower wage foreign labor, ensuring fair wages and job security in the ever-expanding domestic industrial sector. The McKinley Tariff was viewed as a means to achieve broader national prosperity in economic growth through the expansion of domestic industry and a strengthened home market. The higher tariffs aimed to decrease the volume of imported goods entering the country, lessening Americans' dependence on foreign supplies. Does that sound familiar? Sounds very familiar. Right? Really familiar. 135 years later. The new legislation increased rates for many manufactured goods while it placed items such as sugar and coffee on the free list. The bill passed the House 164 to 142, worked its way through the Senate, but it hits a roadblock in Benjamin Harrison. And Benjamin Harrison said, "Why should you have all the fun? I'm the President of the United States. Let me set the tariffs. If I set the tariffs, if the President sets the tariffs, I'll support it in the Senate." And guess what? Harrison got his way. He convinced Senate allies to insert a provision permitting the President to raise duties to match foreign rate hikes and to sign agreements to open foreign markets without congressional approval. It's Benjamin Harrison's fault. All of his fault. Tariffs were a great source of tax revenue in the 19th century. The imported taxes were responsible for more than half the revenue the government brought in. This was actually less than before the Civil War, when tariffs funded nearly the entire federal budget. The McKinley Tariff, no problem with sugar. No problem with, or was there a problem with sugar? Yeah, it was, because they kept the tariffs, high tariffs, on the Kingdom of Hawaii. And eventually, the Kingdom of Hawaii would be overthrown by the sugar lobby, 1893. They wanted to be annexed. Hey, that's another word. Annex, you ever hear that word? Annex this year? The Hawaiians wanted to be annexed by the Americans, the sugar plantation owners and others, so they didn't have to pay the tariffs and the United States market would be open to them. Tariffs imposed duties on items such as tin plate and wool, while eliminating tariffs on sugar, except to Hawaii, molasses, tea, and coffee. The goal of the act was to make the duty on foreign tin plate high enough to ensure its manufacture in this country, McKinley said. It also protected American workers' wages from competition from cheaper labor abroad. The tariffs affected consumer products such as shoes, clothes, canned goods. About 1,500 products in total, ranging from chemicals and metals to dairy products and grains to varying degrees. And there is William McKinley. McKinley, the King of Tariff. He embraced that name, the King of Tariffs. Americans were furious with William McKinley and the Republican Party. Consumers were paying far more for products as the tariffs were passed on to consumers, and consumers were not happy with McKinley. His re-election, that's in November of 1890. Guess what? He's booted out of office, as were a good many Republicans in the House. The House lost its majority to the Democrats. Sounds familiar too. The Canadian Minister of Trade and Commerce, Mackenzie Bowell, noted that the McKinley Tariff, rather than destroying Canada's trade, had simply redirected it from the United States to England. Protectionists within the British Empire used the tariff to advocate retaliatory tariffs and preferential trade with the empire. The McKinley Tariff of 1890 primarily designed to promote protectionism and benefit domestic industries. Instead, it produced much higher prices for consumers, and that's what tariffs do. Mulberry Street, Little Italy, right? Well, this is the conditions back in about 1888, 1889, when Jacob Riis began to take pictures for a newspaper. The pictures turned into a book. It opened up American eyes to what was really going on with immigrant lives, Lower East Side, what would become Little Italy in Lower Manhattan, and that was repeated around the country in various places. And this is his picture of Mulberry Street back in about 1888, 1889. The book was called How the Other Half Lives. Studies among the tenements of New York was an early publication of photojournalism by Jacob Riis, documented squalid living conditions in New York City slums in the 1880s. Now, this appeals to me. I was born on the Lower East Side in 1956. I lived on the Lower East Side on Eldridge Street, corner of Eldridge Street and Hester Street, until I was 8 years old. There was a book called Hester Street. I think there was a movie called Hester Street, all about the time period well before I was born. But when I lived there, it was a slum. Now it's not. The building's been renovated. Ira Gershwin lived in that building too, around 1898. The photos expose the slums to New York City's upper and middle classes. Jacob Riis, well, he immigrated from Denmark in 1870 to New York City. Found it difficult to find work, so he found a home in the slums of the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Went back to Denmark for a short time, returning to become a police reporter. He turned to photography as sort of a pastime, found it a useful tool when writing his police reports. Once he began using magnesium flash powder, he could capture the dark and dingy conditions of the tenements. Again, anybody with roots on the Lower East Side here, ancestors who lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan? Nobody? Nobody, okay. And here he is. In January 1888, Riis bought a detective camera, and went on an expedition to gather images of what life was like in the slums of New York City, the Lower East Side. On January 28, 1888, Riis presented The Other Half, How It Lives and Dies in New York, using his images on a projection screen, kind of the first movie, taking the viewers on a journey by describing the images. In February 1899, Riis wrote a magazine article based on his lectures in Scribner magazine, which was a resounding success. The book version of Riis' work was published in January 1890. It was called How the Other Half Lives, Studies Among the Tenements of New York.
Where did he do his public thing? Did he speak?
Yeah.
And where was this?
Well, Lower East Side in Manhattan. He was in Manhattan. And he brought pictures with him and somehow projected the pictures on the wall so people could see that. Then he writes the book. And this is the conditions. You got the bed here, you got whatever, the two people there. Some tenements had 11, 12, 14 people per room living in there in those days. And the landlords didn't care. As long as you came up with the rent, you could have as many people as you want stuffed into a room. Riis explored the living conditions in the New York slums, as well as the sweatshops in some tenements, which paid workers only a few cents per day. The book explains the plight of working children They would work in the factories and at other jobs. Some children became garmentos, garment workers, and newsies, newsboys, by the time they were 7, 8, 9 years old. He described a system of tenement housing that had failed, as he claims because of greed and neglect from wealthier people. He claimed there was a correlation between the high crime rate, drunkenness, reckless behavior of the poor, and their lack of a proper home. Check out this picture. These are kids who are allegedly at play. They're just laying there in what is basically a stairwell where they're supposed to be playing, and they're just, and if you know this, well, you probably can't, they don't have shoes on. They don't have any shoes on there. He thought he had solutions to the problem. He advocated for better housing, sanitation, education, recognizing that poverty was often rooted in environmental conditions. He said empathy was needed. He thought politicians should have empathy. That's 1890. Riis called for proper lighting and sanitation in the city's lower class housing. He asked citizens from the upper and middle class, help the poor. Well, they weren't helping the poor, and they had a better question anyway. What to do with immigration? What are we supposed to do with these migrants? What are we supposed to do with them? Now, unlike today, in order for somebody to come over to the United States, it's pretty simple. If a country had a trade deal with another country, you could come and go as you pleased, as long as you weren't sick or had eye damage. They looked for eye illnesses, particularly looked hard for that. And if you came to New York, there was no Ellis Island quite yet. There was another facility that they came and processed you. Prior to 1890, individual states, rather than the federal government, regulated immigration into the United States. Castle Garden, now Castle Clinton, located in the Battery of Manhattan, served as the immigration station for the Port of New York from 1855 to 1890. About 8 million immigrants passed through its doors, mostly from Northern European countries. That constituted the first large wave of immigrants to settle and populate the U.S. Castle Garden became overwhelmed by the sheer volume of immigration, lacked space, resources to properly handle them, and there was a lot of bribery going on as well. And that is Castle Garden. And if you came over by boat, the first thing that you would see in the United States in New York was this place, and this is where they processed you. Reports indicate that immigrants arriving at Castle Garden were subject to theft, extortion, faced death due to the negligence of staff. The facility's inability to manage the increasing numbers of immigrants, coupled with the corruption, contributed to a chaotic atmosphere. The federal government began to look for a new facility in the New York City area in 1890. So what to do with immigration? Well, the mechanism started to kick out people in 1882 with the Chinese Exclusion Act. And here you got Uncle Sam kicking the Chinese, well, right in the butt, and get out, get out. And this is the first Immigration Act. Immigration becoming a problem. The United States demographics were changing. Too many Eastern and Southern Europeans entering the country. Code name, too many Italian Catholics, too many Jews. We don't want the Italian Catholics, we don't want the Jews. Got to get rid of them. 1892, the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed. The law restricted Chinese labor immigration for 10 years and prevented any naturalization. Chinese built the railroads in the United States and in Canada, and Canada did roughly the same thing to the Chinese. It also created a deportation system for Chinese immigrants who broke these laws, the first illegal immigrants in American history. The first act to wholly restrict immigration of one specific nationality or ethnicity. It was also the first to allow immigrants to be denied who were considered criminals, mentally unstable, diseased, or anyone likely of becoming a public charge. Congress could not come up with an immigration plan. They kept looking and looking and looking. Sherman Antitrust Act. Well, that also comes to be. And basically, that's supposed to break up monopolies like Standard Oil and Mobil and Esso and all these other oil companies, Boron, Standard Oil of Ohio, Standard Oil of New Jersey. Well, they were the monopoly. They controlled 95% of the oil industry. They were supposed to be broken up and would be broken up by 1905, sort of. On July 2nd, the Sherman Antitrust Act became a law in the United States. The act was designed to promote fair competition and prevent monopolies in the marketplace. It prohibits agreements and practices that restrain interstate commerce, especially outlawing any combination or conspiracy that hinders free trade. The Act's primary purpose is to ensure a level playing field for businesses and protect consumers from potential harm potential harm of monopolies and anti-competitive behavior. Meat inspection. Well, there was no meat inspection. Although Lincoln set up the mechanism, Abraham Lincoln set up the mechanism to have food inspected back in 1863. So he was kind of worried about the kind of stuff you were putting in your body. Well, not much was done. But on August 30th, Benjamin Harrison, the president, signed the first law requiring inspection of meat products. The law required that the USDA, through the Bureau of Animal Industry, inspect salted pork and bacon intended to be exported. The people who were getting this said, "We don't trust you. We're not going to buy your meat anymore in Europe. We're not buying it. We don't trust you." And they put in the system because, A, money's involved. When money talks, nobody walks. The United States had no system of inspection, it could be argued, but it had no system of inspection, that its pork products were safe. They had to do that. Now that is Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Beautiful country, absolutely beautiful country. And Idaho becomes the 43rd state of the United States. It's part of the Oregon country and was claimed by both the United States and Great Britain until the United States gained undisputed jurisdiction in 1846. From 1843 to 1859, present-day Idaho was under the de facto jurisdiction of the provincial government of Oregon. When Oregon became a state in 1859, what is now Idaho was situated in what remained of the Oregon Territory, which then became the Washington Territory. Idaho became a territory when President Abraham Lincoln signed the Territorial Act on March 4th, 1863. Idaho had a lot of problems governing the territory. Idaho becomes important as the population grows because there are gold rushes and other mining activities, and there's money in them there hills. And everybody wants the money in them there hills. And this is why it becomes of political importance and economic importance. Again, in Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. The territory had difficulty organizing itself, and it had to resolve the issues such as the location of the territorial capital and what to do with Mormon polygamists. Well, you got Mormons, and you got men married to 8 to 10 different women, and the rest of the country is not really pleased that one man has 8 to 10 wives, or 4 or 5 wives. The Mormon issue was tricky. The territorial issue, no problem. We're just going to move from Lewiston to Boise. But what to do with the Mormons, because there are a lot of Mormons in the area. The people running the Idaho Territory did not want to see the territory chopped up. They might have been in 5 or 6 different pieces, smaller states. They wanted to stay as one. But something had to be done with the Mormons, and soon. And the Mormons are a problem. Between July 4th and August 6, 1889, representatives throughout the Idaho Territory met in Boise to debate every important topic covered by the Constitution. There was something called the oath test written into the Idaho Constitution 1889. And this is a controversial issue. The bill passed by the Idaho legislature in 1884 was written into the Constitution that prevented members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from voting or holding public office. Well, you can't run and you can't vote. Hey, is that legal or not? Is it legal? Well, we think it is. We're a territory. The church practiced polygamy at the time, which the general public opposed. This is the Republican delegate Fred Du Bois. Idaho statehood legislation passed the House of Representatives in April and the Senate in June. But he wanted to get a star on the flag by the 4th of July. Because if they didn't do it by July 3rd, they'd have to wait a year to get a star on the flag. So he talks to Benjamin Harrison. He's the Republican delegate from the territory of Idaho to Congress, and he visits Harrison at the White House on July 3rd. Harrison didn't sign the Idaho Proclamation yet to make them a state. So Du Bois goes in and says, well, how about it? How about it? You're going to do it? Do it by today. Do it by today. We want that star on tomorrow. The Supreme Court upheld the oath test that religion must be subordinate to the law. So he's got that going for him. And then he says, the president explains to Du Bois, well, we got to get this done because you want that star on the 4th of July. You want that 43rd star on the flag. So if I wait until July 4th or 5th, you won't get to 1891. So this is what they asked Du Bois. The responsibility is all mine, and I ask you to sign the bill now. I want the Star of Idaho on the flag tomorrow. Harrison says, well, I think you've chosen well. Idaho became the 43rd state on July 3rd, 1890, and it got its star on July 4th on the flag. Now, this is the Mormon Manifesto, and basically it's the official declaration that the days of polygamy are over. What would a guy do with 8 wives anyway? Can you imagine the nagging? How come you're with her tonight, not with me? Hey, the kids have the measles. That's not a problem. I'm not with you tonight. I mean, how do you balance your time with 8 different wives? September 25th, faced with the imminent destruction of their church and their way of life, the president of the Latter-day Saints, Wilford Woodruff, issues the Mormon Manifesto, in which they command all Latter-day Saints to uphold the anti-polygamy laws of the nation. The leaders had little choice. If they did not abandon polygamy, they faced federal confiscation of their temples and the revocation of basic civil rights for all members of the church. Well, that is Cheyenne, Wyoming, and that is the capital of Wyoming, a place I haven't been at in about 30 years. Wyoming becomes the 44th state. Talk of statehood for Wyoming began as early as 1869, after the organization of the Wyoming Territory in that year. The road to statehood, however, does not begin until 1888, when the Territorial Assembly sent Congress a petition for admission into the Union. Bills were introduced in both houses of Congress, but it did not pass. Though no legislation passed Congress enabling Wyoming to follow the steps that led to statehood, the governor, Francis E. Warren, and others decided to continue as if an enabling act had been passed. On July 8, 1889, Wyoming Territory held an election of delegates to Wyoming's one and only constitutional convention. 49 men gathered in Cheyenne during September 1889, wrote the Constitution, sent it for a vote on November 5th, 1889. This is a state. This is a territory. Listen to the numbers. 6,272 said yes. 1,923 said no. So you're talking roughly about 8,100 people voting. That was it. 8,100 people voting. And yes, women could vote. women could vote in Wyoming. And that's the Overland Trail in Wyoming. The Overland Trail, of course, went through Wyoming. Becomes the 44th state. Bills for Wyoming statehood were introduced in both the U.S. Senate and House in December 1889. The House passed the bill March 27, 1890. President Benjamin Harrison signed Wyoming statehood bill, making Wyoming the 44th state on July 10. They got their start in 1891. When Wyoming became a state, the new government continued to allow women to vote. Wyoming was actually the second state in the United States that allowed women to vote. Women could vote in New Jersey from 1776 until 1809, and all of a sudden, women could not vote anymore in New Jersey. Wyoming is now considered the first state to allow women to vote, even though New Jersey did allow it back in the early days of the Republic. John Muir in Yosemite National Park. Guy fell in love with the park. At the urging of John Muir, the U.S. Congress designated Yosemite National Park in California on October 1st. This act designated the area as the third national park in the United States, following Yellowstone, which was in the territory of Wyoming in 1872, and Sequoia in 1890. Creation of Yosemite National Park was a culmination of efforts by conservationists like John Muir and others who advocated for the preservation of the area's natural wonders, including Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove of the giant sequoias. The Wounded Knee Massacre, and that came back in your lifetime, 1973. This is it. This is the last stand by Native Americans against the white man conquering the entire breadth of the United States from Maine to California. The frontier is just about gone. Throughout the year, the U.S. government worried about the increasing influence at Pine Ridge of the Ghost Dance spiritual movement, which taught that Native Americans had been defeated and confined to reservations because they angered the gods by abandoning their traditional customs. Many Lakota believed that if they practiced the ghost dance and rejected the ways of the white man, the gods would create the world anew and destroy all non-believers, including non-Indians. On December 15th, reservation police tried to arrest Sitting Bull. He is the Hunkapapa Lakota leader who they mistakenly believed was a ghost dancer at the Standing Rock Reservation, killed him in the process. And there's a battle going on there. On December 29th, the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry surrounded a band of ghost dancers under the Lakota Chief Bigfoot, also known as Spotted Elk, near Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota, and demanded they surrender their weapons. As this was happening, fight broke out between an Indian and a U.S. soldier. Shot was fired, although it was unclear who fired the first shot. The United States military slaughtered approximately 150 to 300 Lakota Sioux people. The massacre was the climax of the U.S. Army's late 19th century efforts to repress the indigenous peoples of the Great Plains. 2/3 of the Lakota victims were women and children. 25 United States servicemen killed, mostly because of friendly fire. The massacre ended the ghost dance movement and was the last major confrontation in America's deadly war against the Plains Indians. The massacre at Wounded Knee effectively marked the end of the conquest of indigenous North Americans on the American frontier. The settlers won the battle of the frontier. The closing of the fort, gone. Frontier, gone. Closing the frontier, totally gone. No more land. No more land to give away. No more land in Oklahoma to give away. We did that last year. There's nothing left. We have conquered that area. Superintendent of the U.S. Census, Robert P. Porter, announced that rapid western settlement meant that there can hardly be said to be a frontier line. In just a quarter of a century, the far west frontier had been settled. 3 million families started farms on the Great Plains during these years. Contrary to the popular image of the West as a rural region, most of the West's population lived in cities. Any baseball fans here? You're wearing a New York Yankees shirt, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, so you must have some affinity for baseball. If you are you a Yankees fan?
How'd you tell?
Well, you're wearing the shirt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought that would be a giveaway.
Yeah, that was good. So you're a Yankees fan.
Yeah, I'm a Yankee fan.
You're a Yankee fan. Well, there was a new baseball league. There were 3 baseball leagues at that time. The National League, the American Association, and the Players League, which in theory was run by players. And that's John Montgomery Ward, who was one of the people who was the proponent of this league. The National League was founded in 1876, the American Association 1882, and would last to 1891, along with the National League. The Players League was formed by the Brotherhood of Professional Baseball, and notice baseball's 2 words, hyphenated, players. The league was a response to the National League's labor practices, which included the reserve clause and salary caps. Reserve clause said if you sign a contract with a baseball team, you're there for life until the owner or general manager or manager gets rid of you. You have no rights. You have no rights at all. Salary cap, this is about all you're going to make. The Players League debuted with 8 teams in Boston and Brooklyn and Buffalo and Chicago, Cleveland, New York, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh spelled with an H in those days. They took the H away in 1891 to give it back to them in 1911. Several players took issues with owners limiting their rights. Led by star player and activist John Montgomery Ward, the Brotherhood of Professional Baseball Players formed in 1885. The organization led to the creation of the Players National League of Professional Baseball Clubs. There is a labor movement going on in the United States at this point. It is slow, but these guys are part of the growing labor movement.
So Montgomery Ward is the
what?
thing that, Montgomery Ward.
No, he has no relation
yeah?
to the store.
Oh.
That's the Boston team, and they wore handlebar mustaches back then, some of them anyway. The Players League offered players an equal say in the governance of the league and the majority of its profits. The league did not include a reserve clause, which meant after you signed a contract, you were free to go somewhere else. The Players League players expected that a handful of investors who backed the league would operate in the best interest of the players. Guess what? They did it. They acted in the best interest of money. They thought the moneyed men would work in solidarity with the players. Just after the 1890 season ended, the Players League owners announced that they were going to join forces with the National League owners and consolidate the 2 leagues into one. While many of the players were part owners of the club, they did not own a large enough portion of any of the teams to prevent their owners from jumping ship. By January 1891, the Players League officially folded. Most of the players went back to the National League. The Players League, like the National League and the American Association, did not hire Negro players. Segregation. The Jim Crow songbook. Apparently there was a character back in the 1830s, 1840s in blackface, and they called him Jim Crow, and it just kept going and going and going. There were no civil rights laws or no civil rights legislation to protect Negroes in the American South. Jim Crow took hold, creating 2 societies. Congress, though, did expand the land-grant plan to include federal support for state-sponsored colleges across the South. It required southern states with segregated systems to establish black colleges and land-grant institutions so that all students would have an opportunity to study at such places. But football. William Henry Lewis and William Tecumseh Sherman Jackson were the first African-American football players on an all-white football team, college team. Football just took players back in those days until about 1933. 20 states passed laws that enacted segregation laws. But there were fewer lynchings than in 1889, as 11 whites and 85 Negroes were killed. In 1888, 170 were killed in lynchings. Lynchings was a sport. People would come out to watch a lynching back in those days. 4,000 or 5,000 people. It was a sport. Okay, a new women's rights group forms. How many of you think that women should have the right to vote? Apparently some people don't believe that today, apparently. Anyway, equal suffrage is the birthright of women. The National American Women's Suffrage Association was formed on February 18th to advocate in favor of women's suffrage in the United States. It was created by the merger of two existing organizations, the National Women's Suffrage Association and the American Women's Suffrage Association. Two groups had been bitter rivals for years with different goals, but both groups pushed for women to get the right to vote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she was one of the organizers going way back when to get women the right to vote. She was a well-educated woman. Stanton married the abolitionist lecturer Henry Stanton in 1840. She became active in the anti-slavery movement and worked alongside leading abolitionists of the day, including Sarah and Angelina Grimke and William Lloyd Garrison, all guests at the Stanton home while they lived in Albany, New York, and later Boston. While on her honeymoon in London, hey, how many of you have gone away on your honeymoon and worked? Nobody? Actually, I did one day, but I was in Anaheim, California, had to do something, so I snuck away for a couple hours. But, yeah, you go on your honeymoon, you generally expect something else, don't you? Right? No, you're shrugging your shoulders, you don't know. You don't know. What'd you do on your honeymoon? You don't know. Anyway, so she's on her honeymoon to attend the World's Anti-Slavery Convention in London, England. Stanton met with abolitionist Lucretia Mott, who, like her, was also angry about the exclusion of women at the proceedings. Mott and Stanton become fast friends, and they vowed to call a women's rights convention when they returned home. 8 years later, 1848, Stanton and Mott held the first women's rights convention at Seneca Falls in New York. And this is our roll of honor, containing all the signatures to the Declaration of the Sentiments set forth by the first Women's Rights Convention. And the first two names, first name on there is Lucretia Mott. The fourth name on there is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So, hey, let's get the women the right to vote. This is 1848. No woman in the United States or its territories at that time was allowed to vote. Stanton authored the Declaration of Sentiments, which expanded on the Declaration of Independence by adding the word women and women throughout. All men and women are created equal. The document called for social and legal changes to elevate women's society or place in society, and they had 18 grievances, from the inability to control their wages and property or the difficulty in gaining custody in a divorce to the lack of the right to vote. If you're a woman, chances were you weren't going to get the kids if there was a divorce. She meets Susan B. Anthony along the way. Although Stanton remained committed to the efforts to gain property rights for married women and ending slavery, the women's suffrage movement increasingly became her priority. She met Susan B. Anthony in 1851, and they became friends, and they started collaborating on speeches, articles, and books. 1862, the Stantons moved to Brooklyn and later New York City. Brooklyn wasn't part of New York City. Brooklyn was a city onto its own at that point, and New York City was basically Manhattan. That was about it. She became involved in Civil War efforts and joined with Anthony to advocate for the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery. An outstanding orator with a sharp mind, Stanton was able to travel more after the Civil War, after her kids grew up. She became one of the best-known women's rights activists in the country. And there she is with one of her kids. Her speeches address such topics as maternity, child rearing, divorce law, married women's property rights, temperance, abolition, and presidential campaigns. She and Anthony opposed the 14th and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution, which gave voting rights to black men, but did not extend the franchise to women. Their stance led to a rift with other women's suffragettes and prompted Stanton and Anthony to found the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1869. Stanton edited and wrote the NWSA's journal, The Revolution. As NWSA president, Stanton was outspoken as a social and political commentator and debated the major political and legal issues of the day. If she was around TV, she'd be on one of those screaming cable TV shows, news shows, which I have been on. No, you did. Food fight. I mean, when I was doing shows at WGRC back in the early 1980s, we did not do any screaming on the shows. It was just 45 years ago, you just didn't do that. Today it makes good TV. By the 1880s, Stanton, who was in her 60s, focused more on writing rather than traveling and lecturing. The National American Women's Suffrage Association began advocating for state-by-state enfranchisement of women. At the time, a few territories provided full voting rights to women before statehood. Wyoming, 1869. Utah, 1870. Washington, 1883. And Montana, 1887. Along with numerous articles on the subject of women and religion, Stanton published the Woman's Bible, in which she voiced her belief in a secular state and urged women to recognize how religious orthodoxy and masculine theology obstructed their chances to achieve self-sovereignty. I could just imagine her on one of those cable TV panels. She'd be screaming, and people would be screaming at her. The scramble for Africa. Let's divide up Africa. Let's go after it. Scramble for Africa was the invasion, conquest, and colonization of most of Africa by 7 European powers driven by the Second Industrial Revolution. It introduced an era of new imperialism as Belgium, France, Germany, United Kingdom, Italy, Portugal, and Spain took over African land. 1870, about 10% of the African continent was formerly under European control. The 1884 Berlin Conference regulated European colonization and trade in Africa. On August 5th, the United Kingdom and France reached a diplomatic solution over a colonial dispute that would guarantee freedom of trade for the British Empire while allowing France to expand their influence in northern Africa. In exchange for France recognizing Britain's protectorate over Zanzibar, the British Empire recognized France's claim to Madagascar, as well as their sphere of influence in northern Africa stretching down to the border region of Sokoto. Well, Vincent van Gogh dies, kills himself. Anybody see Starry, Starry Night in the MoMA?
Starry Night.
Yeah, in the MoMA in Manhattan.
Yeah.
Starry, Starry Night. Probably his most famous painting. Vincent van Gogh created over 2,000 works of art in his lifetime. His most famous piece was Starry, Starry Night, and Sunflowers was another piece. On July 27th, in a field near Avers, France, he shot himself in the chest with a revolver. He died 2 days later with his brother Theo at his bedside. Van Gogh may have killed himself because he was exhausted from working hard and the high standards he set for himself. He was uncertain about the future and felt that he had failed as a man, as an artist. He was also mentally ill. Van Gogh never sold any paintings in his lifetime. He never sold any paintings in his lifetime. The electric chair. Poor guy is going to get electrocuted right there. Arbor Prison in upstate New York. It's August 6th, the first execution by the electric chair took place. Arbor Prison in New York. Condemned man was 30-year-old William McKinley, who had been convicted of murdering his common-law wife, Tilly Ziegler, with a hatchet. First jolt of electricity failed to kill Kemmler. So another jolt of electricity was ordered, killing Kemmler. Proponents of electrocution, including Thomas Edison, touted the new method as quick, effective, painless, and humane. This was not humane. Kemmler's execution was lengthy, about 8 minutes long, and not considered humane. So what was the legacy of 1890, and what are we still living with in 1890? Tariffs. Certainly, we're living with tariffs. We're living with immigration problems. Haven't been solved in 135 years. William McKinley's higher tariffs translated to increased prices for consumers. This led to public discontent, contributed to a significant political backlash. The McKinley Tariffs may have pushed the United States into a depression in 1893. McKinley recovered politically and was elected president in 1896 and 1900 twice. He's the guy who people hated. And within 5 years, we love William McKinley. Let's make him president. Even though he cost you a lot of money in tariffs. He was assassinated in 1901, Buffalo, New York, at a World's Fair. He was no longer a tariff man. He became an advocate of international trade, and he kind of opened up China to the United States for trade. Canada was targeted in the trade war with the United States in 2025. Jacob Riis Park, that's out by Far Rockaway, and for those of you who are interested, there is a topless area in that beach, in case you want to take off your clothes. Anyway, Jacob Riis' book, How the Other Half Lives, documented the deplorable conditions of New York City's tenements, prompting the first significant legislation to improve housing. His work is credited with laying the foundation for muckraking journalism, a style of investigative reporting focused on exposing social problems and corruption in the very early 1900s. He was the first, I'm going to get into Sinclair Lewis in a second because he was a muckraker. Riis championed the rights of children, advocating for reforms to end child labor and create spaces like parks and playgrounds for them to play. William Howard Taft was president between 1909 and 1913, and here he is at the gates of Ellis Island saying, "Stay out, stay out." Castle Gardens in Lower Manhattan was replaced by Ellis Island in 1892. In the early 1900s, U.S. immigration officials mistakenly thought that the peak wave of immigration had passed. By 1907, marked more than 1 million immigrants was processed. In 1924, the Johnson-Reed Act severely limited immigration, virtually shutting America's doors to Eastern and Southern Europeans. The Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed in 1943. Monopolies. Well, that is me, and that's Pete Rozelle, and that is 1986.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And that is the United States Football League, National Football League antitrust trial, which the USFL actually won, but they couldn't figure out how much money to give the to the USFL in damages. That was the first real antitrust trial I ever went to, and it was interesting to listen to. But anyway, that's me, and that's Pete Rozelle outside the courtroom. Sherman Act was largely ignored until Theodore Roosevelt's presidency. Sherman Act is enforced by the U.S. Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission. State attorneys generals can also pursue enforcement action. The penalties, violations can result in severe penalties, including fines up to $100 million for corporations and $1 million for individuals, as well as imprisonment up to 10 years. Individuals and businesses harmed by violations can also sue for treble damages, 3 times the actual damages. In that USFL-NFL trial, the jury awarded the USFL $1, and it was tripled to $3, and that was the end of the USFL. The Jungle, Upton Sinclair. The Muckraker, Upton Sinclair. In 1891, via amendment, Congress also required inspection and certification of all live cattle and beef bound for export. The era of health inspection for commercially processed food had begun, at least for those foods bound for foreign markets. Americans, you could eat tainted food. We can't, money, it's money. They can't have tainted food in those markets. 1906, Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle. Anybody read The Jungle back in the day?
I read that.
You read that?
Yes.
You read that?
It's very good.
It was good. The Jungle, about the Chicago stockyards, led to President Theodore Roosevelt in Congress to deploy federal inspectors in meatpacking houses via the 1906 Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 because of a muckraker, Sinclair Lewis. Here's another shot of Idaho. In recent years, there's been a grassroots movement to move Oregon's mostly rural and southern colonies to Idaho. There's a belief by some people that those Oregonians would be better served in Idaho's more conservative political environment. Idaho is the #1 producers of potatoes in the United States. There is Wyoming. Anybody been to Wyoming? It's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. Wyoming became known as the Equality State. The National Suffrage Convention, 1891, included this tribute. Wyoming, all hail, the first true republic the world has ever seen. 1925, Nellie Taylor Ross was elected governor of Wyoming. She was the first woman to serve as governor in the United States. Her supporters said it made sense. Wyoming was the first state to allow women to vote. That's not true. New Jersey allowed women to vote, but took it away. That is the Grand Canyon. And Benjamin Harrison's an interesting character in the scheme of things. Benjamin Harrison is often considered a pioneering figure in American conservation. People think it's Theodore Roosevelt. It wasn't. It was Benjamin Harrison. Harrison's love of nature can be traced back to his visits to Yellowstone National Park. That park was established in 1872. Harrison visited 3 times during his life. During his time in the U.S. Senate, he successfully fought to limit the Yellowstone land lease to hotels to at 10 acres. He introduced legislation to set apart part of the land, or a tract of the land, on the Colorado River. That bill failed, but the land, now known as Grand Canyon National Park, would be eventually preserved in 1919. So you can hear that Theodore Roosevelt did this, this, and this. It was Benjamin Harrison who started all of that. Native Americans. The Wounded Knee Massacre and the forcible rounding up of Indians following it crushed any resistance to white rule in the West. Any hope the Sioux or other tribes had of being able to restore their way of life was obliterated. And life on the detested reservations became the plight of the American Indian. In February 1973, activists with the American Indian movement seized and occupied the Wounded Knee, South Dakota site for 71 days to protest the U.S. government's mistreatment of Native Americans. The standoff resulted in the deaths of 2 Native Americans. The baseball card. And there's a guy by the name of Ryan who played in the Players League. The National League Reserve Rule, which tied a player with a team until a team decided to get rid of the players, prevailed. Salaries soon fell back to pre-1890 figures. Baseball's reserve rule remained in place until 1975. The Major League Baseball Players Association forced Major League Baseball to abolish the rule and open up a new era of free agency. Pay your poll tax. Until 1964, poll tax is legal in the United States. After the establishment of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, after the Civil War ended in 1865, African Americans were gaining prosperity. Reconstruction ended in the mid-1870s. African American men were losing their right to vote through grandfather clauses, poll tax, and literacy exams. Jim Crow took hold and lasted until the mid-20th century. August 19, 2025, President Donald Trump ordered his attorneys to conduct a review of Smithsonian museums, calling their portrayal of U.S. history too negative, focused too much on how bad slavery was. There is Stanton and there is Anthony. Susan B. Anthony died in 1906. There were no natural successors to Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Anthony in the fight for women's suffrage. Elizabeth Cady Stanton died in 1902. Others stepped in and fought. Most women, but not all women in the United States, did get the right to vote because of a constitutional amendment in 1920. Native American women did not get the right to vote until 1924 because Native Americans became citizens that year. There are some men who want to repeal the 1920 constitutional amendment allowing women the right to vote in America. 1960 is known as the Year of Africa due to the number of African nations that gained independence from colonial rule. 17 countries, primarily from France and British colonies, declared independence, marking a pivotal moment in African history and the broader process of decolonization. The countries were under pressure from the United States to let the colonists go. It was a promise during World War II. If the colonies helped the Allies, England and France, then the United States would work to get the territories' independence. Van Gogh. Van Gogh did not receive widespread recognition for his art during his lifetime. While he had a short, prolific career as an artist, his work was largely unappreciated by the public and art critics of his time. Sold one painting during his lifetime, The Red Vineyard. His post-death fame grew significantly in the 20th century, largely due to the efforts of his sister-in-law, Johanna van Gogh Bodmer, who collected and promoted his work. Van Gogh is considered one of the most important and influential painters in history. That is Sing Sing. Sing Sing. More than 70% of world's countries, 144 nations, have abolished capital punishment in law or practice. The United States continues the use of the death penalty. About 55 countries still have the death penalties on the books. It is thought that China, Iran, and Saudi Arabia have the highest number of executions. The electric chair has been criticized because of several instances where the subjects were only killed after being subjected to multiple electric shocks, including Ethel Rosenberg. You've heard of Ethel Rosenberg? The Rosenbergs, they had to keep jolting her with electricity when they got rid of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. This led to a call for the endings of the practice as being cruel and unusual punishment. We're in 2025, but a lot of the issues of 1890 still remain, believe it or not. Any questions, any comments? It's your turn. Go ahead.